My name is Peter Pouliot, and I work for Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft the last 2.5 years. Specifically, I started at Microsoft. I was brought on board to basically drive their involvement with OpenStack. My background, I've spent the last roughly 13 years working professionally in open source. I worked for a small company called Symbian. Back in the day, I was their Windows guy. Symbian made the first Linux and Unix client for Microsoft Exchange. It was functionality, it was part of Evolution. After that, I spent, Symbian was acquired by Novell, and I spent 9 years supporting open source development, GNOME development, Mono development, pretty much any other open source project that was run out of Miguel de Casa or Nat Friedman's group, for those of you who know the names. Basically in 2006, Novell and Microsoft had a business agreement where they decided to work on virtualization. I built the data center infrastructure and worked on the team that effectively put Linux on Hyper-V. And I can honestly say it was 6 months into my Microsoft career before I ever put Windows on Hyper-V. So from that perspective, I'm an oddball at Microsoft and have been from day one. My background is primarily systems administration, data center infrastructure, network infrastructure. I've been a one-man data center team for a very long time. Spent a lot of time automating, operating system provisioning, and I'm effectively operating system agnostic from, I'll use the best tool for the job. One of the things that I came here to talk about today was specifically our use of Puppet and the continuous integration infrastructure that we run to support Hyper-V and in fact Windows in the OpenStack community today. Okay, so first we'll talk about a quick overview of Microsoft's involvement within the Puppet community. We'll talk about an overview of continuous integration, because I know specifically in Windows systems administration camps that these things are entirely new concepts. Right. The one thing that you'll find is a common theme throughout my discussion today is sort of Puppet helps us bring it back to computer science. Right. We're all computer scientists at the end of the day, so we don't have to have religious affinity to technology. Right. So anyway, the next thing we'll do is give a high-level overview of like I said, the role Puppet plays within the continuous integration project. And give some insight into how we use Puppet with Windows and the modules that we've created and stuff like that. So, to start, so just some questions for me that I want to ask, because I want to get a good read of the room, is how many people in here know what OpenStack is? Oh, that's good, okay. How many people knew that you could use OpenStack with Windows? Right, all right. Should get a long way to go, I guess, huh? In terms of Puppet on Windows, how many people use Puppet on Windows today? Wow, you got a long way to go there too. And those of you who do use Puppet on Windows, are you consuming PowerShell within your modules? Great, awesome. And then from a continuous integration, continuous delivery perspective, are those new concepts to everybody in the room? If they are, raise your hand. They're completely new. Okay, so good. Most of you have heard of it. Fantastic. So Microsoft and Puppet Labs, over the last year, we've had actually a really good relationship. It started primarily with our Azure team and the MS OpenTech folks. MS OpenTech is a subsidiary, part of Microsoft, but a subsidiary of Microsoft that was created to help drive open source involvement in the community. This year in March, they released a Puppet module to support the Azure IaaS APIs and other APIs, so you can use that. The funny part is around the same time that this was going on, I just happened to be in the Redmond campus because I live out here, and I bumped into an event where they were talking about this, and I was like, oh, that's cute, because I have about 40 Puppet modules to support Windows on a GitHub repo that none of you know about. So anyway, that's the GitHub repo. We have, or let's say I started this project at Microsoft about 6 months in to my tenure here. When I came on, what had happened is the Hyper-V code within Nova was removed, and I basically was brought on to get that code put back in. I'm not a developer. I had to build an open source community to do so. As a result of that, the progression was to support that code, we need to have a continuous integration infrastructure. And choices were made. We chose Puppet based on the strong community, the ability for multi-platform support, things like that. So, as a result, we've created a pretty rich catalog of modules to support core Windows functionality, as well as just basic Linux stuff. We're platform agnostic on my team. So all of the members of my team either work directly on putting Linux on Azure, or putting Linux on Hyper-V, and work in the testing infrastructure, testing side of the fence of that. So. All right. So, just a quick slide on continuous integration. Continuous integration is a process of basically continuously providing quality control, right? From a development standpoint, it ensures that the code that's going into the code base is going to work when it comes out the other side. From an infrastructure perspective, it allows us to make sure that we have a handle on our change control, right? One thing that I think is yet to really evolve yet in this space, this new DevOps movement that we have, is the true ability to reduce change control times, right? Like the more automated we get, the less need for service windows. We can remove service windows completely, right? CI can help us automate everything that we can do in our infrastructure today and ensure that it's not going to break it when we actually implement it. So, typically, we're talking about automated unit testing a lot of times, built around the code that we're developing, making sure that each function does what it says it does. And then usually we have an infrastructure in place that is a representation of that deployment, or gives us the ability to virtualize the entire deployment such that we can assure everything throughout the process of it. So and all of this falls in line with the agile methodologies and such, short development cycles, attainable goals, things like that, things that operators have been living on for ever. Let's talk a little bit about what we do from a continuous integration perspective. So, most people, I don't know if anybody in here knows exactly what the OpenStack CI does, but in a brief nutshell, for every commit to the multiple, the numerous projects within the OpenStack ecosystem, a cloud is deployed and the APIs are tested. Okay. As of today, there's some 60 different continuous integration infrastructures spread around the globe by different vendors, software companies, people using it. And when new code comes down the pipe, alerts are triggered and jobs are spun up that effectively test that. The results of those tests are fed upstream to a gate, and then human reviews applied to determine whether or not the code's of quality to get through. Now, this process, in the process of testing, it's grown. I believe there's over some 600 odd test cases that occur for Nova, and that's just that's one of the major projects. So and it happens for every project. So it's huge. It's a huge undertaking. Right? In our case, because of some of the limitations of Hyper-V today, such that we can't do nested hypervisors. So everybody know what a nested hypervisor is. Basically, the ability to run a hypervisor on top of a hypervisor. So essentially, I'm going to virtualize a hypervisor in a virtual machine and then put a virtual machine on top of that virtual machine. So that's what they do today in basically the OpenStack ecosystem for KVM development, right? Unfortunately, I can't do that because I can't nest Hyper-V on Hyper-V. So we have to go with blunt force trauma and physical bodies. So effectively, we have an OpenStack deployment where we stand up cloud controllers. We have layers of nested networking and SDN occurring. And then we plug in physical Hyper-V nodes into those and then do all the configuration to enable the OpenStack cloud goodness to happen, and then run Tempest, which is the testing framework. Obviously, with all the moving parts, from an OpenStack perspective, a lot of Python dependencies. If anybody's ever used Python on Windows and know how well it's packaged, you can imagine how much fun that can be from a Puppet perspective to get those pieces onto the system. Now, that being said, when I started building this, because it was just me originally, and let's just say some of my infrastructure wasn't the most reliable. That's where Puppet really came into play for me. I used it to basically add I guess, multiples of myself when I couldn't be there, right? I would just automate it and Puppet as rapidly as I could and use these sort of tenets. Basically the key was have the ability to redeploy anything, anywhere, on Iron or virtual in under 15 minutes, because chances are the server just broke and I have tests to get done to get the code, into upstream, and don't have the resources to do it. So, we relied heavily on automation from day one. Basically, the next thing is trying to be operating system agnostic. So, there's cases where as operators, we don't have time to waste debugging something. I just need to move on, get it done, and then I'll worry about it later. We wrote a lot of our Puppet codes, that way we could gut the operating system out from underneath and move to something else if need be. Specifically for like a lot of Linux distributions, it's really easy to do that. A lot of the modules already support multiple operating systems, so you can move back and forth pretty much with ease and with very little additional coding. It adds a great layer of flexibility because from a tooling perspective, you really can move very rapidly and not have to sort of stop midstream to deal with issues. So, obviously, consume as much upstream stuff as possible, right? I didn't have time to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of great modules out there already. The Puppet Labs does a great job to support their existing modules, so why not use them? So not only use them, but we use them and contribute back, in some cases, adding Windows support to modules that didn't have it. Additionally, I come from a long line of I guess people, or I guess my background was owned from a group of guys who are some of the top open source engineers in the world today. And from that perspective, I'm going to use OSS as much as possible to do this, because I believe in open source and I believe that there's a spot for open source on Windows, and I realize I'm in a position where I can prove it. So, that's what we're trying to do, is prove that you can use open source on Windows and have viable technological solutions that are just as good as on Linux. And in fact, that we're just practicing proper computer science. So, once again, why Puppet? And I touched on this a little bit earlier. It was really the multi-platform support. In our group, so I work in OSTC, the Open Source Technology Center. We actually, directly contribute code to the Linux and FreeBSD kernel. Eventually I'm going to want to do stuff with that code in my OpenStack CI. So I might as well pick a technology that will support as many platforms as possible. And Puppet does that for us. So it's very easy to use on multiple platforms, and once you get to a certain level, once again, it's just computer science. It's not BSD or Unix or Linux or Windows. My customers are already using it. So, I don't know how many know, there's a very, one of the biggest OpenStack deployments today was the first to run Hyper-V in production. And that's at CERN, our particle physicist friends in Switzerland. They actually, as I mentioned, actively contribute to the development of the Puppet modules that we have to support Hyper-V, and are helping to advance that to take on additional modules for higher level OpenStack APIs running on top of Windows. So things like Ceilometer, heat, those sort of things. So, and once again, going back, strong catalog of modules for Linux, although at the time when I started, there was a pretty limited choice for Windows. But the community was strong, and it was very easy to get help. Many of you, if you've been active long enough, you probably know Dan Bode. Dan Bode helped me tremendously to get to the point where I'm at today. So, it's I can't say enough about the quality of the Puppet community. So, what do we use it for? We use it to deploy everything. It builds the Pixie appliance that we use to provision. It builds the templates for every operating system we deploy. It provides machine state. In some cases, basic just execution. We use it for data collection using factor. So pretty much anything we can, we use it for. So, the Hyper-V CI and Puppet, the modules that we have today, as I said, we built, we either built them from scratch or used existing modules to build the entire infrastructure. The kickstarts and pre-seeds, everything's data-driven, so we rely heavily on Hera. For us to deploy a new operating system, including all the automation to deploy that operating system, it's just at the point where we just feed in text strings and it determines it based on what we fit in and deals with the rest. We've done node and switch configuration via Puppet. I have to admit, I'm still wary on pulling the trigger on full switch configuration across my infrastructure because my level of trust as an operator sometimes is still in the old school when it comes to some of that stuff, but I will get there. We've been an early adopter of R10K. We used to use library and Puppet, but the speed and the dependency support within R10K is a little more in lines of what we need, and we've migrated very rapidly to using it. Just a little history lesson on Puppet and Windows. So I started my career in Puppet literally by teaching myself on Windows as a platform. And I did this in 2012, and it was one of the most excruciating experiences of my life. It wasn't necessarily, Puppet on Windows, or was it Windows on Puppet? I don't know. Windows has a lot of challenges. We take things like package management and Linux for granted. The ability to log into a system and put any piece of software on that without having to have really any major user configuration interaction is pretty key. So not having that on Windows is painful. A lot of what we did early on was, especially for that, where they retrieve scripts that would go and get the right packages, because the moving target of OpenStack requires a lot of sort of latest and greatest, and that we track a lot of sort of upstream stuff. And at the time when I started, fortunately, because it was a one-man show, we couldn't build those ourselves, so it was necessary to rely heavily on what was available from within the community. And unfortunately, let's just say the practices for packaging Windows MSIs isn't very standard, so the quality of the automation that you can wrap around the current installers for a lot of open source components that we used, in some cases we would have to basically rip them apart and blunt force trauma style and shoehorn them into place. I will say that is changing, right? It's really changing a lot, because in the last year specifically, Puppet Labs has made some major investments on the Windows side, right? Like, they have a Windows team now. When I started, they had a guy part-time, I believe, that was maintaining this stuff. Now they have, I think, 4 dedicated guys. One of which is Rob Reynolds, who is the creator of Chocolatey, which, for those of you who don't know, is a great little open source package management utility for Windows. And there's a great community of people who build packages, open source packages for Windows. And in fact, Puppet Labs builds Puppet packages for Windows that you can use with Chocolatey, and they maintain them, so that way you can update them just like you would on Linux, which is a pretty nifty thing. Because of this and things like Josh Cooper's PowerShell module, we can achieve, as I said, parity with Linux to the point where I can use upstream Linux modules on top of Windows without even the Puppet module knowing it's Windows. And that's actually a pretty crazy thing when you see it. A lot of the cases for what we do, I don't want to have, there's a lot of OpenStack automation out there, let's be clear, right? Specifically around the CI stuff. I need to be able to use as much of it as I possibly can. However, none of it supports Windows. So, from that perspective, we tend to abstract what we need first and then get it to a point where we can just use as much upstream as possible. Literally starting this March, I made a conscious effort through events like this, through accidentally bumping into key people in Puppet Labs. I decided to take it upon myself to try to get a better relationship between at least the Windows Server side that I'm on and Puppet Labs, because, well, I need their help. And what we've been able to do is, our team's been able to help find critical bugs in the recent releases of Puppet as a result, because we actually run Puppet on the latest, greatest versions of Windows, right? And we have to use the latest, greatest version of Puppet because that's where all the new Windows features come in. So, in an environment like an OpenStack where they typically in the upstream CI they pin on 2.7, I have no choice but to use the bleeding code coming out of the community. So, from that, we tend to find a lot of bugs. Sometimes they destroy the whole CI, but luckily now that there's a great responsive Windows team inside of Puppet Labs, we get lots of help when we need it. And so from that perspective, I encourage you to use it and use it often. So, we also, as I said, our team contributes to the upstream modules when possible, and we actually have a huge backlog of stuff that we want to get released to the Forge, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So, a couple of things that I like to think about from a best practice perspective when using Puppet on Windows is one, let's remember it's computer science, right? The task that you're usually automating is something that might be very specific, but if we just remember that, then let the fear go away, and we can all be multi-platform DevOps engineers instead of caring about Linux or Windows. From a future perspective, if you're going to write a module, use PowerShell. Don't rely on the old legacy utilities like ISM and those sort of things on Windows. PowerShell is the interface for configuring Windows, period, right? The other tools that exist today, eventually, over time, will probably become depreciated and will be, replaced, or there's already a PowerShell alternative to do it today. So I highly suggest using PowerShell whenever possible, because it'll allow for module portability in the future. So, once again, Chocolatey, there's actually a Chocolatey package provider. Which makes it really easy, and once again, we can help us achieve a near Linux-like state out of Windows in our automation. Additionally, if you have existing Puppet modules today, add Windows support if you can. It's great that it strengthens the community if there's strong modules out there for people to use, and if they work with Windows, then hey, we get diversity, and diversity is key. Oh, okay, did I just do that? There we go. So, best practice. All right, so yeah, as I mentioned, we have some 40-odd modules sitting on a GitHub repo. Why aren't they in Forge? Well, because it was just me for a long time, and we have a lot of work to do to clean them up. As I said, when we met with Puppet Labs in March, one of the big things we talked about was what they do for continuous integration for their modules. And my goal is to ensure that we do the exact same thing within Microsoft. So from that perspective, until I have the infrastructure running, to ensure that we're doing what Puppet Labs does, I'm not going to push the modules to the Forge. They are consumable today. And I can definitely share those with you. And if you want to help participate in our project, I'd be more than happy to help you and enable you to do so. But that's basically the key. So we have to do a lot of refactoring, documentation. Some of them are very well documented, have really good documentation. Others have none. It's just the nature of speed. We were under tremendous deadlines this year to get the CI running in order to comply with the project mandates. So we didn't have enough time to put the love in it, but we're working on that now. And hopefully, I'm hopeful by the end of the year, or beginning of next year, we'll be able to push them all to the Forge. So, with that, we want to, develop a release pipeline and do all the other nifty little components. And as always, how many are aware of StackForge? So for those of you who aren't, StackForge is another project, a continuous integration project that tests, let's say, the supporting cast of technologies that you can use with OpenStack, and it tests it with the same rigorousness that the upstream OpenStack project is tested with. So all the Puppet Labs OpenStack modules today, I believe, get tested in StackForge. And our goal is to integrate all our existing Windows Puppet code into those modules at some point. Unfortunately, due to the nature of complexity of this undertaking, we couldn't start from day one. We have to start and just get it to work first. So, that's where we stand on sort of StackForge integration. So, that's what I got for a talk today, but I figure, I've heard there's a lot of questions about basic Windows stuff on Puppet, so I figured I'd open the floor to anybody who has questions, either Puppet related, OpenStack, open source. I'd be more than happy to answer anything. Go ahead.
GPO editor, Puppet modules, if it works.
Say it again?
Defining GPOs via
Oh, group policy objects? I believe, so I have to admit, there is, we're not doing anything around that right now. I believe I saw a module the other day that, in the community that might support it. I don't know, I don't remember if it's a Puppet Labs individual who has it or if it's someone else, but you know, that's one of the big problems, just as an aside, is that the lack of, there's not a lot of coordination between members of the Windows community that are providing Puppet modules. So there could be stuff out there and you wouldn't know, right? So yeah, definitely I can ask my friends and see if we can find it and go from there, right? Yeah, anything else?
So how do we get in better touch with what you're doing in terms of what you're doing?
So, you know, unfortunately, you know, I hate to say this, but this is a byproduct of old corporate mindset within Microsoft. When I started, you know, I was very limited as to what I could say, limited in terms of how vocal I could be in the community. Most of the way people found out about what I was working on and what I was doing was through my direct interaction with the community. As of right now, you know, we are in and it's all public, we're in a state of you know, reorg and trying to figure out what we're gonna do with the new CEO. And you know, I'll tell you this, I'm gonna be more vocal from this point on. We've got things going on that are going to, I think, allow me to take a more active role, not just in, you know, the Puppet community, the OpenStack community, but hopefully, you know, broader open source momentum that's going on within Microsoft right now. So, you know, things will change. Today, what I suggest is we have from a, you know, obviously I have information here, there's a slide decks. Feel free to come and see me. I can point you to both the technologies that we use, you know, from an OpenStack perspective. I can point you to the modules, and we can, you know, go that route. But until I get, you know, let's be clear, you know, it's not, you know, Microsoft today has the only operating system that doesn't ship with open source components, right? But it's just ridiculous. From my perspective, if I can help change that, that would be awesome. But it's not something that happens overnight. And unfortunately, a byproduct of that is just bad documentation. So, you know, there is a big conscious effort right now, both on the OpenStack side. So we are in the process of updating the OpenStack wiki and things like that. So you'll be able to find more information around those. As we get to publishing the modules, obviously they'll end up showing up in the Forge. But in general, you know, it's more community based. So things like IRC, we're on the IRC channels, OpenStack IRC channels, things like that, mailing lists. But outside of that, today there's not much, unfortunately. Sure.
Along those lines, do you see Microsoft embracing Linux more over the last 5 years?
Oh, I can promise you that we have. One thing that I've, you know, let's be honest, one thing that I've noticed, you know, Microsoft, we're in a cloud dominant, let's say, momentum right now, right? Microsoft has a substantial investment in cloud infrastructure. And, you know, from my personal experience, there's no such thing as a cloud without open source today. So I see, you know, I see a definite, you know, obviously there's a definite role for open source on Microsoft's cloud. You know, we have a IaaS service on Azure. Right now, you know, Linux is a substantial percentage of that workload. You know, we work very closely with the Linux vendors today. So I personally would work closely with Canonical and Red Hat and CentOS and, you know, the different distro-based communities that exist. We work with the corporate entities as well. So, you know, from that perspective, you know, there's a lot more opportunity, I think, for better usage of open source inside of Microsoft and better integration. And it's starting. I would say it's starting. Stay optimistic, right? Back up.
In the GitHub repo, I see a couple of Vader repos in there as well. Are you guys going to be leveraging Vader more for your dev work?
In my GitHub repo? Interesting.
The MS OpenTech repo.
Oh, okay. So I'm not part of MS OpenTech. So they might be. As I said, MS OpenTech is a subsidiary of Microsoft that it was created to participate. I know one of the, and actually, just memory just came back to me. I know for a fact they actually did, I believe, release Windows images for the Vagrant community, and that is probably what you're looking at. But from our perspective, we don't use Vagrant in my CI. We're a little bit bigger use case than Vagrant right now. Go ahead.
Nothing to do with your talk, I apologize.
Oh,
I'm
that's
looking for Kevin McQuaid. Are you in here? No? Dominic? Kaiser? You want to do it? Let's do it. All right, thank you, sorry.
No worries. Any more questions right there?
I've been living mostly a Linux world. We have Microsoft in our Microsoft Service Management. Do you have any general good advice or best practices for incorporating Windows into modules with a slide edition? Don't be afraid to do it.
Oh yeah. So whatever you use, to be honest, I look at it this way: don't deploy it unless it's code, regardless of operating system, right? So anything new, just dive right in. Say, okay, we're going to deploy that functionality or that change as code on Windows, and then start from there. Do a little research, look for any of the existing modules that exist today. Maybe you can utilize those, leverage them, extend them, right? From that's I would say the starting point, right? Most people, and I know even just in the local business community, those who are practicing automation, DevOps style automation today, the majority of the stuff they're automating are their Linux workloads. The stuff that they're doing for Windows is minimal, and that's mostly because I just think a lack of the skill set, right? Typically, your Windows systems administrator is it's a very GUI intensive job that they're used to doing. Most don't have the proper experience to utilize PowerShell, or it's unfortunate. It's the nature of how the technology sort of drove their users. It doesn't mean that the platform itself isn't as rich or robust as Linux. It's just it's weird. I have to admit I don't know how to explain it. All I know, and we were talking about this earlier, it's a phenomenon going on right now. We see it everywhere. I walk into a large bank or financial house and they're like, hey Peter, we have this Linux department that's practicing DevOps and we want to do that on Windows. It's like we don't even know where to begin. And that's really what happens is most people don't. And the reality is, okay, it's just computer science. We put a client on the operating system, write some code, and hit apply. So, the biggest one, the Josh Cooper PowerShell. That's from this point on, I start every module with that. We have what we call a Windows Common module that we use a lot in our CI, and it's just basic low-level, Windows abstraction, NTP features, certain commands that we need to prep things. We have a Hyper-V module that we do vSwitch instantiation, so we can create multiple vSwitches on the fly on Hyper-V. We use it to prep, we do that. We do the enabling of the actual, Hyper-V role. There's administrative components that we can control on the fly that we do with that. From a module perspective, that's what I use mostly today. From a low level to get you going, if you're going to start out, literally, Josh Cooper PowerShell, Rob, Fervent Coder is his IRC handle, but Rob Reynolds, his Chocolatey, and then literally with the two of those, you can get full Python stack, you can get a full Git, and actually get to the point where you can start using upstream standard modules for Linux. Because think about it, if the module itself is just sort of exporting and using standard OS paths, and you already have everything in place to deal with package management and this, and like the same things that the Linux module would need, then it really just works on Windows at that point. So, and that's, once again, that's where the real, once you start getting to that point, that's where the real power, I think, comes in, and you start to see it with Puppet, because now, you can do things at another level, right? Most times, when people see levels of automation like that on Windows, they're like, come on, you gotta be kidding me. And it's like, no, it's happening, you're watching it. And the thing is too, is sometimes we have to take and do things that on Linux, it's easy, but on Windows, it's either not there. We don't have that functionality, or there's just a different way to do it. And that's where, once again, the reliance upon the tool sets and tool chains that exist in the open source community today, you can have you can support your Windows instances in your environments today in the same way you support your Linux. So, I'm here to tell you you can do that. Thanks, so back there.
Do you see anybody really using Puppet to manage Windows desktops?
Yeah, we actually I've seen a little bit of both. I remember the guys at Open Table I know they were doing a lot of Puppet on Windows work. I've used it for managing development environments within our CI. The team they gave me early on needed a lot of guidance, so having the ability to sort of guide them through, pre-configuration is key, right? So things like that. There's some usage. I know in the enterprise in some of the larger environments, they're beginning to use it at the desktop level. But traditional Windows tools, I think, are still being used also in those areas because, once again, typically your Microsoft professional isn't going to sort of have the knowledge about the open source alternative, right? They might not. So unless there's a corporate initiative to use certain technologies that are pushed to open source, they're usually using a boxed product for automation or image creation, thing like that. Good.
Just Puppet, like you said, on Linux side, it's mostly state. So if you say that you need a application patch or something like that installed, you'll grab it, put it in, grab all the things it needs. Does it also do that on the Windows side, say IIS or something like that, or does it not handle that portion of the state and adding a watch or say install IIS or something?
Yeah, it depends on what it is, right? So, I have to admit, we don't use much IIS, and we're not actually on the, installing on the fly features or roles other than Hyper-V right now.
Like packages, I guess.
Well, so this is what I'm getting to. So with packages, that's where we use Chocolatey. So, and from that perspective, yes, it's exactly like Linux at that point.
So you can install like updates and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it depends. Once again, it depends on, you have to use it in the context of the packages that are provided by Chocolatey, right? So, yes, you can go like, see up package name foo, and it'll update the package, and you can actually, use the latest as a package target, and it will on the fly install the latest package if the package is available. But once again, we don't have that for everything, right? A lot of the modules actually that we built originally, because the Chocolatey provider wasn't there, we did a lot of work to actually go out and retrieve, MSIs or URLs and sort of pseudo wrap package management into it, because there wasn't something like that at the time. So, we did ways to deal with it. Now we try to use Chocolatey as much as possible. So, and I'm hopeful that, eventually a lot of the work that we're doing, because we do tend to, build a lot of stuff from source. I'm hoping that we can get to the point where I can take that, we can release it as packages as well, and then offer, open source packages built by Microsoft in a format that you guys can consume easily within your DevOps toolset of choice, right? And I'd like to get there, but that's a long ways off from right now. With the pen.
Oh, okay. I noticed that Microsoft is offering through PowerShell something called desired state configuration.
Yeah.
It looks almost exactly like Puppet from a syntax point of view. Is that a collaboration, a competition? Could you speak to that a little bit?
So I have to admit, I don't know a ton about DSC. I do know some. You could think of it as like an internal to Windows engine for configuring stuff. Ideally, it would be used as an interface that Puppet or Chef or Salt would consume. It's like a provider. So it's a hook into automation for Windows state they're building into Windows itself. I agree with you. The code itself looks, when I saw it for the first time, I was like, oh, look, we write Puppet. From that perspective, I don't know where it's where it's really going. I know right now, like the stuff that I work on, we're heavily committed to from this point and for the foreseeable future into using Puppet. We don't use a lot of the internal, other applications right now. So until I have a need, I'm not gonna do that. And DSC is also very young, so the level of robustness that it would provide in its early state, I don't think I could get any benefit from using today. Now, it doesn't mean that, down the road, your existing modules might want to consume DSC versus, whatever convoluted thing it's probably doing already. I sort of see it more like that, like it's something your Puppet code would consume. I don't know another way to put it, quite honestly. Hopefully that answers you in some way. Right here.
Can you talk a little bit about Windows authentication and how that interacts with Puppet and non-root?
So we actually, well, we don't, all our machines are toasters. We don't actually touch them. So from using Puppet and user space, I don't really have the need to do it today. So I don't have much experience using it like that. All our executions are usually agent-based, or if something fails, we log in and look, see what's going on, and do a manual, agent run. But that's about it. We're pushing toasters, so there's not. I don't have a use case for that right now. Sorry, I wish I could answer it better.
That's fine.
All right, hey, thanks everybody, I appreciate it.